I gave the approval for the Israeli astronaut to go.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yes.
It started then.
And on the day that he went up, former Prime Minister Barak called and thanked me and reminded me that he and I had done this deal to allow this remarkable human being to go into space. And I fought for the space program when I was president. Dan Golden, who was the director of NASA, did a great job of economizing. He cut some expenses when we had to cut the budget deficit, but we increased manned space flight funding by $150 million. I believe in it. I think we learn a lot about it. What I'm doing tonight to talk about global warming at the Rolling Stones concert, a lot of what we know about the Earth's environment we know because of space exploration and what we can see about our planet from outer space. We need to know what the black holes in outer space are like.
And robots won't do that.
Well, robots will do a lot of it, but I supported the International Space Station, and I supported extraordinary efforts we made to keep the Russians involved in it. I believe in it. It's that and the deepest depths of the oceans are our last great frontiers, and we've always been a questing people, and I still believe in it.
Where were you the morning of Columbia?
I was home, and I got
Saw
up.
it on television?
Yeah, I saw it right after it happened. I got up, and actually I had CNN on, and I saw the shards going across the sky.
What goes through your mind?
Well, I thought about it a lot because we had a lot of missions when I was president. And I hosted a showing of Apollo 13 at the White House with Tom Hanks. And because I was so interested in it, and I went down to Florida and watched liftoffs. The most dangerous points of space travel are the first 90 seconds when you lift off. You got all those powerful rockets, you got to lose a couple of stages, and a lot of things can happen. That's what happened before, 17 years ago to Kristen McAuliffe and those people on Challenger. And then when you come back in, if the spaceship goes in at too shallow a plane in the Earth's atmosphere, it'll bounce off and just fly off into outer space forever. If it goes in at too steep a plane, it'll burn up. So it came in, they said that the problems happened at about 205,000 square feet, I think. So I thought to myself, what could have happened? Did the computer go out and the pilot have to make a last minute, the pilot would take over? Did he not have enough time? Did the computer malfunction, or did something happen to the spacecraft? Did it not?
Are you confident we're going to find out?
I think we probably will. And I think the rest of it, we should just let them do their work. Believe me, they'll try to find out, and they'll shoot straight with us because they want to know.
The scientific challenges for all of us here on Earth.
I think every space mission is special, and everyone comes with its own set of challenges.
The loss of this valiant crew is something we will never be able to get over. Many of us were standing alongside the runway waiting to celebrate their triumphant return after a 16-day science mission. Conversations with the crew and their families, they said that we must find what happened and fix it and move on. And we can't let their sacrifice be in vain.
Our journey into space will go on.
Roger, roll, Columbia.
and grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Twas grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've known less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see.
Let us bow for prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to assemble today at this difficult time at the Shuttle landing facility to acknowledge and honor our 7 friends and colleagues. Our hearts are heavy and full of sadness right now. However, we are strengthened by knowing that our fallen colleague would encourage us to continue the great exploration and space adventure that they sacrificed their lives pursuing. God, we know that through your grace and mercy, we will have the strength and courage to assure that their dreams never end. We ask that you help the family members, the NASA family, and all of mankind cherish their memories and the contribution made in pursuit of space exploration for the future. Father, I ask that you comfort us in your gentle ways as we cope with this tragedy loss of this wonderful NASA team. Your words say that you will never leave us alone. Just as you said in John 14:7, peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. Now, dear Father, order our steps, and let us remember the words of Isaiah 14:10. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. With God's help, we can endure this hardship and begin once again to focus on the future. We know that with God all things are possible, and unto his name we'll give praise and glory. Amen.
This is the place where our space exploration dreams take flight. From here, 7 courageous astronauts sail to the heavens on their daring adventure of exploration and discovery. This is where the great lives are defined by great purposes. Throughout our history, people have always marveled when great ships leave their ports and venture out beyond the horizon. When the history of our time is written, future generations will always know that the port that sent spirits and spacecraft soaring was named Kennedy. It is from this port that 41 years ago this month, Mission Control uttered the words, "Godspeed, John Glenn," as this original 7 Mercury astronauts became the first American to orbit the Earth. It was from this port that our Apollo moon voyagers set forth, coming in peace for all mankind. Mystery creates wonder, and wonder is the basis of man's desire to understand, said Neil Armstrong. The hero whose very next footprint after he stepped away from the sandy soil here in Florida some 34 years ago came on the lunar soil at Tranquility Base. Great lives are defined by great purposes. It was from here, too, that spacecraft have been sent to explore the planets and moons of our solar system, sending back evidence of fascinating places that humans yearn to explore in the century ahead. 22 years ago from here, Columbia, the new gem of our ocean of space, launched on her maiden voyage with the outstanding crew of John Young and Bob Crippen, who we're honored to have here with us today. Along with her sister shuttles, Columbia set the stage for the permanent human occupancy of the space frontier, an amazing milestone in human history that is now being achieved on the International Space Station. This was the port from which all this historic exploration occurred, and from which so much more history will be made as we continue to pursue our mission goals of understanding and protecting the home planet, exploring the universe and searching for life, and inspiring the next generation of explorers. Before her final voyage, Scott Thurston and the extraordinary team of folks who lived with, worried about, and attended to every single detail of Columbia made sure that it was safe for flight. She carried as wonderful a group of human beings as you could ever hope to assemble. Rick Husband, Willie McCool, Mike Anderson, Dave Brown, Laurel Clark, Kalpana Chawla, and Ilan Ramon. We miss them more than words can describe. Last Saturday, Columbia and her stalwart crew were minutes away from this port, this very spot, and safety, following their noble mission to advance the frontiers of science. Friends and family, we were all gathered here at the Shuttle landing facility, waiting to give these space explorers a welcoming hug for their return to this good Earth. And instead, God brought the crew members into his loving embrace. Such are the mysteries of existence that we can never hope to fathom. And throughout our family, here at Kennedy as well, our rivers of tears flow. It was our fervent prayer that Columbia and its crew would safely come home to its harbor here. But this was not to be the case. But please know this. Do not lose heart. The families of the astronauts, the American public, and the President have all expressed deep confidence. On Tuesday, recall, the President said, "The people of NASA are being tested once again. In your grief, you're responding as friends would have wished, with focus, professionalism, and unbroken faith in the mission of this agency. Captain Dave Brown was correct. America's space program will go on." And we thank the President's brother, the Governor who is here with us today, for the wonderful expression of support that he demonstrates. Governor, we are all proud of the performance of the Kennedy Space Center team. We know spaceflight has risk, but on Saturday, when our worst fears were realized, the people of this center were focused, organized, and deliberate, doing so well what we've all been trained to do so many times. Your response here at Kennedy and the teamwork that was displayed was simply magnificent. And throughout this difficult week, you have participated in our ongoing analysis and debris recovery work with thoughtful regard for the enormity of our duty. Like the rest of the NASA family, we will persevere. The entire Space Coast community and the people of Florida are part of this extended NASA family. To you, the astronauts were more than heroes admired from afar. You shared a special bond with these space explorers because when they went on their amazing ventures, they were going from this very backyard. We know the pride you have in our astronauts and in our entire NASA family. And to honor the legacy of Columbia's astronauts and as a commitment to the families, you can be assured that we will find the cause of the accident, correct the problems, and return to safe flight. Every time I come to Florida, I'm eager to meet the members of our future generation of explorers. And there's so many here in the Florida area that certainly fit that characterization. Up and down the Space Coast, there are kids who go to bed dreaming they will one day grow up to be the heroes of the caliber of Rick, of Willie, Mike, Dave, Laurel, Kalpana, and Ilan. To these explorers of the future who are so fortunate to attend schools with names like Astronaut, Freedom 7, Challenger 7, Atlantis, Discovery, Endeavor, and of course, Columbia, we have a special message. While we're filled with sorrow now, there's so much about these historic and heroic astronauts for us to be grateful about. Be grateful that each had a burning desire to conduct research to help better our lives. The astronauts who represented such a wonderful tapestry of races, religions, nationalities also demonstrated through their genuine love for each other the essential brotherhood and sisterhood of man. Ilan Ramon reflected on this truth when he paused to ponder the beauty of his ancient homeland. He observed how it looks marvelous from up here, so peaceful, so wonderful, and so fragile. We thank him for that priceless memory. Great lives are indeed defined by great purposes. This is the legacy of the Columbia astronauts that we will always remember and treasure forever. May God bless the crew of STS-107 and give comfort to all those who mourn for these valiant heroes.
We are gathered here this morning to honor and salute the Columbia crew of mission STS-107. The grief in the hearts of the crew's families and the entire NASA family, which includes all of our contractor community which supports the agency, is very heavy. Still, this crew lived lives that deserve our celebration. Yes, they were cut short, but these brave men and women lived their lives to the fullest, doing much more in their time here on Earth than many can imagine. Words at a time like this seem weak. They don't fully communicate the depth of our feelings. The NASA family speaks much clearer with actions. The action that is being taken to find the cause of the accident, correct it, and continue the crew's journey of discovery in space is the grandest tribute that we can pay to them. I'm certain that is what they would have wanted. It is fitting that we're gathered here on the Shuttle runway for this event. As Sean said, it was here last Saturday that family and friends waited anxiously to celebrate with the crew their successful mission and safe return to Earth. It never happened. I'm sure that Columbia, which had traveled millions of miles and made that fiery re-entry 27 times before, struggled mightily in those last moments to bring her crew home safely once again. She wasn't successful. Columbia was a fine ship. She was named after Robert Gray's exploration ship, which sailed out of Boston Harbor in the 18th century. Columbia and the other orbiters are all named after great explorer ships, for that is their mission, to explore the unknown. Columbia was hardly a thing of beauty, except to those of us who loved and cared for her. She was often bad-mouthed for being a little heavy in the rear end, but many of us can relate to that. Many said she was old and past her prime. Still, she had only lived barely a quarter of her design life. In years, she was only 22. Columbia had a great many missions ahead of her. She, along with the crew, had her life snuffed out in her prime. I was here at the Shuttle runway in March of 1978 when Columbia first arrived at the Kennedy Space Center. She came in on the back of the 747, escorted by Deke Slayton in the T-38. She certainly wasn't very pretty at that time. A large number of her tiles had not been installed, and many that had were not adhering very well. KSC management made a fairly unpopular statement at the time that it was going to take several years to get her ready to fly. They were right. Ready for launch by the loving care of the Kennedy team, the same care they had given to all 28 of her flights. She was finally ready to fly in April of 1981. John Young and I were privileged to take her on that maiden flight. She performed magnificently. The world's greatest electric flying machine, which was what John described her as. Because she was a little heavy, she didn't get some of the more glamorous missions, but she was our leader in doing science on orbit. Just as she was doing with this crew in SpaceHab on mission STS-107, microgravity scientific exploration was her bag. She carried Space Lab numerous times, studying material processing and life sciences, all of which were focused at giving us a better life here on Earth. Columbia also helped us better understand the heavens and learn about the origins of the universe with several missions, including Astro, also by deploying the most advanced X-ray observatory ever built, the Chandra Space Telescope, and by our very recent Hubble Space Telescope servicing mission. Just as her crew has, Columbia has left us quite a legacy. There's heavy grief in our hearts, which will diminish with time, but it will never go away, and we will never forget. Hail Rick, Willie, Casey, Mike, Laurel, Dave, and Alan. Hail Columbia.
We are born out of a vision of the hard-working man, with faith in our freedom and pride in the land. Now you've written in our history what it means to take a stand. Oh, what a life! Oh, what great Americans. And all my life I have searched with all my might for the truth in the struggle, the hope in the fight. But with your lives you have shown me that it's right, that there's a chance for me, a hope to be a great American. And you lived your lives with courage. Now in glory you stand, and with your wings of freedom you help us understand that when you stand up for your country, so you stand up then for me. This is the light, this is our life as Americans. And all my life I have searched with all my might for the truth in the struggle, the hope in the fight. But with your lives you have taught me what is right, that there's a chance for me, a hope to be a great American. Fields of daisies bathed in light, and drops of winter's golden rain, to fly into a sunrise that you'll never see again. There is starlight here from heaven, and great honor at hand, that brings us together from all across the land. Let us rise to meet the challenge that our destiny demands. This is our light, this is our life as Americans. And all my life I have searched with all my might for the truth in the struggle, the hope in the fight. But with your lives you have shown me that it's right, chance for me. I hope to be a great American. Fields of daisies bathed in light, we'll meet again. God bless the great
A couple of nights ago, I was sitting around the kitchen table in the home of Pam Milroy and her husband, Chris. Susan Kilrain, a pilot of mine on a couple of our missions, had flown in from Puerto Rico, and we were sitting around the table, and we were all grieving in our own way. But what we found was that talking about our fallen friends, talking about what they had meant to us, swapping those stories was so great a tonic. Let me tell you those stories, some of them now. Rick Husband was the commander. Concerning his professional skills and his leadership abilities, you really only need to know two things. First, we recruited him into the astronaut office because of his wide-known reputation within the Air Force. Second, Rick was offered his own shuttle command after only one flight as a pilot instead of the standard 2. He was that good. But Rick wrapped all this skill in a West Texas aw-shucks demeanor that totally represented his humility and his respect and his caring for everybody. That attitude set the tone for his entire crew. In the words of one of the Kennedy test team members, they were the tightest knit bunch we've ever seen and one of the best we ever launched. Let me tell you about Rick's crewmates. Mike Anderson. Mike was the quiet, get-it-done professional. His calm confidence reflected an inner peace that came from somewhere deep within himself and his love for his family and his absolute belief in his God. The Space Hab team remembers that they respected Mike's natural leadership so much, they worked doubly hard so that they might win his respect for them. Late in the mission, the Space Hab team got their answer. Mike took the time to write an email from space thanking them for their tireless and outstanding support. Mike was a class act. Laurel Clark. Laurel was meticulous and detail-oriented, but she balanced this intensity with an absolute unwillingness to start any meeting without giving you a hug or asking about your family or telling you with pride about hers. And she never ended the meeting without remembering to thank everybody there for what they were doing. If a member of her ground team was passing through town, she'd invite them over for a home-cooked meal. Laurel made everyone, regardless of where they ranked on the organizational structure and the organizational chart, she made them feel like a colleague and a co-conspirator for success. Willie McCool. Laurel described Willie as an 8-year-old trapped in a 10-year-old's body. Now, partly this referred to the fact that Willie had the genes from somewhere that made him look like a 10-year-old, his young appearance, but mainly it was a comment on Willie's almost boyish attitude about everything he did and everybody he met. He always exuded a positive and enthusiastic can-do spirit. When you were around Willie, you got the feeling that he knew just how lucky he was in both his work and his home life. And somehow that made you walk away feeling a little bit better about your life. Elon Ramon. His experiment trainers referred to Elon as the machine. Now what this meant was he was so good. He could sit down with an experiment he'd never seen before. Just ask a couple of quick questions to understand what the principles were and what they were trying to achieve. And then he could run through the procedures absolutely correctly the first time and every time. On this mission, Elam was representing an entire country, Israel, and the aspirations of all persons of the Jewish faith. The weight of this responsibility would have burdened a lesser man, but Elam always wore a smile that spoke of confidence in himself and in those upon whom he depended. Kalpana Chawla, or as she thankfully let us call her, KC. Many astronauts, I dare say most, deal with the pressure of the last few weeks before you launch by taking on this attitude of, please just tell me only what I need to know and do it as quick as you possibly can. But not KC. No detail was ever too small, and no information was unworthy of her interest. Casey was dogged in her preparation, but she was also good at cutting through that NASA technical jargon. She once summarized a half page of technical details on setting up an experiment as, oh, this little guy over here connects to that silly little tether over there. Astronauts rate each other, unofficially, on their ability to be trusted with critical duties on orbit and the depth of their orbiter system's knowledge. On this scale, Casey had developed into an astronaut every commander wanted. Dave Brown. Dave probably didn't know this, but he was categorized with envy by his fellow astronauts into a very special group we call the Renaissance astronauts. You see, before he was an astronaut, Dave was a Navy fighter pilot. And before he was a naval aviator, he was a medical doctor. And before that, he was a national class gymnast and even a circus performer. Dave's theory about life was to have fun at everything he did and to do everything possible. And he did everything so well. Dave was a wannabe Steven Spielberg. He edited miles of camcorder tape that he took of his crew's activities and made them into very, very polished videos, music included. Every crew family will now cherish those videos forever. Dave, Casey, Elon, Willie, Laurel, Mike, Rick. Losing you is one of the hardest blows we've ever suffered. But knowing you was and will always be one of our greatest treasures. Thank you for gracing our lives with your love and your friendship. We will never forget you.
Mourners gathered on the runway where the shuttle was scheduled to land on Saturday. The service was timed to end at 9:16 in the morning, the same time that Columbia would have set down.
Frankie kann's immer noch nicht fassen. Ich habe selbst noch Fotos von der Columbia Crew gemacht. Wir haben ein Glas Champagner getrunken und ich wünschte ihnen viel Glück für den Flug. Wir sind alle erschüttert. Die NASA ist ein so wichtiger Teil unserer Gemeinde. Frankie ist der Italiener, 500 Meter vom Haupteingang der NASA-Zentrale in Houston entfernt. Das Stammlokal vieler Astronauten. Nach der Challenger-Katastrophe 1986 verlor Frankie jetzt auch seine Freunde an Bord der Columbia. Ich hätte sie so gern wiedergesehen und gefragt, was sie erlebt haben. Aber dann geschah dieses furchtbare Unglück. Schock und Trauer in Amerika. Don und Kathy Areola fanden ein Stück der Raumfähre im Garten. Ganz knapp neben ihrem Haus. Beweismaterial für die NASA-Experten. Es war wie ein Donnerschlag und wurde immer lauter, das ganze Haus zitterte. Überall Wrackstücke und Schaulustige. Trotz aller Warnungen fassen viele die Wrackteile an. Wir sagen den Leuten immer wieder, wir machen sogar die Fotos für euch, aber lasst die Wrackteile liegen. Tragödie über Texas lautet die Schlagzeile in der Kleinstadt Nacogdoches, wo viele Trümmerteile niedergingen. Bilder, die Amerika nie vergessen wird. Die Columbia bricht kurz vor der Landung auseinander. Warum die 7 Astronauten sterben mussten, ist nach wie vor ungeklärt. In den ersten Tagen nach dem Desaster konzentrieren sich die Experten auf ein Problem beim Start. Sekunden nach dem Lift-Off reißt ein Stück Isolationsmaterial vom riesigen Treibstofftank ab und beschädigt wahrscheinlich Hitzekacheln unter dem linken Flügel der Raumfähre. NASA-Kameras zeichnen alles auf, aber Sicherheitsexperten kommen zu dem Ergebnis, kein Problem für die Astronauten. Ein Abbruch des Starts gilt als so gefährlich, dass der Kommandant das nur bei einem eindeutigen Notfall befehlen würde. Aber hätten die Astronauten den Space Shuttle reparieren können? Beschädigte Hitzekacheln während des Flugs auszutauschen ist unmöglich. Es gab kein Werkzeug an Bord und die Tragflächen bieten nicht genug Halt. Auch ein Rettungsflug zur internationalen Raumstation kam nicht in Frage. Die Columbia hatte nicht genug Treibstoff an Bord. Der Flug der 7 Astronauten verlief nach Plan, bis 16 Minuten vor der Landung. Beim Wiedereintritt in die Erdatmosphäre erhöht sich die Temperatur an Bord immer mehr. Auch ein Stück Weltraummüll oder ein Meteoroid, so glaubt die NASA jetzt, könnte den Hitzeschild der Raumfähre beschädigt haben. Sensoren melden das Problem an die Bodenstation, aber der Funkkontakt zum Space Shuttle bricht mitten im Satz ab. Die letzten Worte des Shuttle-Kommandanten Rick Husband. Tausende Wrackteile wurden inzwischen gefunden. Fast ein Wunder, dass niemand am Boden verletzt wurde. Jede Fundstelle ein kleines Mahnmal. Ein Stück Uniform. Freiwillige finden sogar den Helm eines Astronauten und Körperteile. Am schlimmsten sind die Helfer dran, die Leichenteile finden, sagt dieser Pfarrer. Wir alle können es kaum fassen. Das waren unsere Brüder und Schwestern, die ins All flogen und nicht wiederkamen. 7 Glockenschläge für die verunglückten Astronauten. Amerika nimmt Abschied von der Besatzung der Raumfähre Columbia. Auch der Präsident ist unter den Tausenden, die im NASA-Zentrum in Houston trauern. Auf jedem Kontinent, in jedem Land, das die Astronauten von dort oben gesehen haben, wird man sich an sie erinnern. Ein Ehrenplatz in der Geschichte unseres Landes ist ihnen sicher. Sie haben für immer den Respekt und die Dankbarkeit aller Amerikaner.
And today, I offer the respect and gratitude of the people of the United States.
Immer mehr Menschen bringen Blumen zum NASA-Kontrollzentrum in Houston, in tiefer Trauer und mit der Hoffnung, dass der Shuttle weiterfliegt.
Will go on.
Wir werden weitermachen. Wir geben Amerikas Weltraumprogramm nicht auf. Denn es liegt in der menschlichen Natur, zu forschen. John Glenn, der erste Amerikaner, der die Welt umkreiste, weiß, was das bedeutet. Mehr Geld für die NASA, weitere Entdeckungsreisen ins All und neue Gefahren.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Johnson Space Center. For today's briefing, once again, is Shuttle Program Manager Ron Vittemore. Again, he's got a briefing for you today, and we are considering this a briefing, and although it is a press conference, we're going to have a limited time for question and answers with all the NASA centers, so bear with us, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. And with that, I will turn it over to Ron.
I was reflecting upon the week. It's been 6 days since the accident. Tremendously long week for every one of us. And as I was reflecting upon that, I wanted to review a few things that I've told you during the week. You know, in these types of incidents, the nature of trying to pull everything together leads to some confusion. It leads to misinformation and even some second guessing on all of our parts. And there's a certain amount of fluidity in the direction that we may take as we wade through these choppy waters of trying to gather all the relevant information. Recall that in the beginning I cautioned against jumping to conclusions
And I think over the past week you have witnessed an inside view of our ups and downs as we've attempted to steer a course throughout the week. Early in the week, we received bursts of data and information. But now, there is not a lot of new information for me to report to you. We are now entering a tedious phase of review, re-review, detailed examination of all available data and information. And it's just going to be a painstaking process. Some of that early information is now being reviewed, and some adjustments are expected as we get a better understanding of the pedigree of the information and the data. The timeline has stabilized, but it is still undergoing a few tweaks. And because it's important that we get it right, I'm not able to provide that to you today. I am going to provide you some information that I think will help you understand the relationship between the loss of sensors and some temperature increases over the time frame, and I hope that that will help you get a better feeling of what we may be working on. I spent the morning visiting the workforce that builds the external tank in Michoud, Louisiana. There is just a tremendous amount of activity going on at that location. There are fault trees being developed, and there's an extensive testing plan also being developed. Because of the events of this previous week, and certainly a lot of the conversations that we have had, and a lot of the news reports that they have read in that area, both printed and media, there's a certain feeling over there that they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. And I went over to talk to them concerning that weight and explained to them that they are just one area of investigation and that there are many other branches and roots to the fault tree that we also need to examine. And I hope they felt better about that. They're not the only issue that we are exploring. They're one of many. And we appreciate their work, we appreciate their diligence and determination, and they are extremely motivated to try and find the root cause of this accident. Some information that I received from the mission or mishap investigation team just before I came over. This is the latest report from the field. We have recovered a partial wing leading edge RCC panel, that's reinforced carbon-carbon panel. It's 26 to 27 inches long with 18 inches of wing structure still attached. We are still trying to determine whether or not it is the left or the right wing. I think we should be able to determine that in the next day or so. To help you understand the magnitude of some of our problems, there have been over 350 reports of debris outside of Texas and Louisiana, 132 reports in California, of which 4 are closed, 130 reports in Arizona, of which 8 are closed, 9 reports in New Mexico, of which 4 are closed. Of all those reports, there has not been one confirmation of shuttle debris to this time. So we still have a lot of work to do, and we're following up on each and every one of those reports. Let me now walk you through some of these slides that I brought with me. I haven't practiced this, so I hope we can do this and make it sensible to you. Let's have the first slide. I'm going to walk through a series of cartoons that help you understand the relationship of these temperature sensors and skin sensors in the left wing. These are not engineering drawings by any stretch of the imagination. I also want to caution you that the times that are identified on these particular slides are very preliminary. In fact, I am not confident that these are the right times at all. One of the reasons why you're not seeing the timeline today is because we don't believe we have the right times established. This was our first burst of data. This was our first run through the information, and we anchored on some of these time frames. Now, as we are going through and poring over the data in more detail, we're finding that we made some mistakes in identifying where the right points should be. And I've asked the team to go back and review that again because I do not want to put out any misinformation on the timeline. So even though these times show up in these charts, I want you to understand they're going to change. So when I read the newspaper tomorrow, I hope you put some caveat to say these aren't the solid numbers, because they aren't. They are going to change. Let's go to the next chart. Okay, let me explain to you how to read the chart. And you're looking at a top view of the wing. It's the left wing. We've tried to identify the sensors that we have talked about over the last week. You can see the wheel well. There are a number of sensors located in there. And at this point, at the beginning of the time frame that we have studied, which is about 7:52 a.m. Central Standard Time, GMT, it's 13:52 to get that correlation. Everything in green is a good sensor functioning nominally. An off-nominal sensor is going to show up as red, and then a sensor that just quits working, as we have talked about, it goes off scale low or off scale high, is going to show up as black as we step through this sequence. So here we are at 13:52 or 7:52 a.m. in the morning Central Standard Time, approximately 7 minutes prior to the loss of signal, where we lost communication and data from the vehicle and the crew. Let's go to the next slide. Here we are 20 seconds later, and again, caution you about the times and the delta time frames. These are all going to change. I want you to understand the relationship of these sensors, not necessarily the times, but it gives you a feel of what we're trying to review and what we're trying to investigate. The first indication, left main gear brake line temperature starts to rise. A 2-degree per minute rise is not significant, so we are not sure whether this is the real start of any significant event, but we're pointing that out today. First indication, as it shows red on the view graph. Next chart. Left main gear brake line temperature A starts to rise. I should point out also, as you look at the chart, I don't know if you can see that well, but there is kind of an orange or yellow cabling that connects several of the green sensors from the wheel well down into the back part of the wing or the trailing edge of the wing. The way to think about that is it's all in one common wire bundle or a set of bundles. There's a blue bundle or wire bundle at the trailing edge of the wing. That's a separate wire bundle. So that's going to become important to us as we think about common points of where there could be some heat source that could, at one location, disrupt several sensors. Let's go to the next chart. This is the third indication. The left main gear brake line temperature C starts to rise again in the wheel well. The next chart. First indication of a skin temperature going offline. You can see it's on the left inboard elevon. This is one that just quits working. Next chart. Hydraulic system 3, left outboard elevon actuator return line temperature goes offline, stops working, stops registering as functional. Next chart. Hydraulic system 1 left inboard elevon actuator return line temperature becomes non-functional. Next chart. Hydraulic system 1 left outboard elevon actuator return line temperature, again non-functional. Hydraulic system 2 left inboard elevon actuator return line temp, again non-functional. So you can see we're trying to develop an understanding of a pattern and whether or not there is some common point that is preventing these sensors from functioning, and we're looking certainly at the wiring and the routing of the cables and the timeline. If you looked at the top of the chart, you can see that we're just running along the timeline in a sequence of events. Next chart's the left main gear brake line temperature B. We start to see it rise, so now we're back into the wheel well again. The next chart, mid-fuselage left body line temperature. Now this one's interesting because we don't believe it's connected in any of the wired bundles to what's in the elevon or what's in the wheel well. And so it's odd to us that this appears suddenly, but it begins to rise. And again, this is on the sidewall of the orbiter, back in this location. Not on the wing, on the sidewall. Whether that's important or not, we don't know. And so that's part of the investigation. Next chart, left main gear strut actuator temperature begins to rise. Next chart, left main gear uplock actuator, unlock line temperature begins to rise. Okay, here we are at approximately 7:54 a.m. Central Standard Time. No reports from the crew, no reports from our flight control teams. Everything is operating and functioning nominally in all of our systems. All we are seeing is some of these sensors dropping offline in a sequence of events over a period of time. Next chart, system 3, left hand, forward brake, switch valve, return line temperature starts to rise, back in the wheel well. Next, main landing gear, left outboard wheel temperature goes offline. Remember I explained to you previously that we had sensors on both of the tires in the wheel well. In a sequence of time, you'll see that they all didn't go offline or quit functioning at the same time, which leads us to believe that we didn't lose the tire. The tire didn't deflate. We didn't have some event happening, but what it means we don't know yet. Let's go to the next chart. Left upper wing skin temperature, left lower wing skin temperature goes offline. So you can see it's connected to the cabling that is common to many other sensors. Next chart, system 2, left hand. Aft brake switch valve return temperature starts at an off nominal temperature rise. And when I say start, again, I'll go back to what I mentioned previously in this briefing, and that is we're not sure where these start times really mean anything to us. This may be such a gradual change at the start times I'm talking about that it is not an off nominal event. As we go back and examine the data, we may find that it was relatively flat in this time frame, and then 2 or 3 minutes later, it took a significant swing upward in temperature. And that's why I say I'm not sure we have the right starting point, but I hope you're getting the idea of what we're trying to look at. Next chart's the main landing gear left hand outboard tire pressure. Number 1 goes offline, non-functional. Next chart, main landing gear left hand inboard tire pressure goes offline. So you can see the sequence of how these things are starting to add up. Here we are at 7:58 approximately a.m. and so we're getting near to the time where we lost contact with the crew in the vehicle. Next chart's the main landing gear left hand inboard wheel temperature goes offline. Next chart, main landing gear left-hand outboard tire pressure goes offline. Next chart, main landing gear left-hand inboard tire pressure, number 2, stops working. I believe that's the last chart. So that's the sequence of events as far as all the data that I've tried to explain to you over the last week. I hope that was informative to you. It certainly is helping us understand what's happening at what times. What it means yet, it's going to take us some time to figure that out. Be cautious about your own conclusions. We continue to look at photographic evidence. As I mentioned to you yesterday, it is challenging and difficult and proceeding slowly. We did receive a photo from the Air Force optical range at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. We can show that photo if we have it. I'm aware that there may be some of you that are saying this photo is revealing. We have looked at it. We had it during the week, and it's not tremendously revealing to us yet. I'm not an expert in looking at these types of photos, and so we are asking experts to do an evaluation of the photo to see if there's anything in this particular photo that would help us understand if there's anything wrong on the left wing. Here's the right wing, okay, and the left wing down at the bottom of the photograph. Now it looks a little more distorted on this large screen than it is in the actual photograph. But the nature of the photograph, because of the resolution, has a little choppiness to the wing leading edge. Some people are looking at this area on the bottom area of the photograph, and which would be the wing leading edge, and they're trying to draw some conclusions from that area. It's not clear to me that there's something there yet. If your eye is sharp, maybe you can draw a conclusion. I can't. And so we're asking the experts in the field to look at this particular photograph. We have been doing that over the last several days, and it's just part of our suite of information that we're going to continue to pour over. Again, I hope that is informative to you to help you understand that these things are not black and white. And you can get a particular photograph and someone might draw an immediate conclusion, and to us, we don't draw the same conclusions. I'm aware that there may be some reports and media reports that say this photograph is tremendously important. It's not clear to me that it reveals anything significantly at this point. Not anything significant at this point. So again, I'd be cautious about what all this information means to you. We've got a long way to go. And we have to add up all the different photographs and look at every piece of information and catalog it properly until we get the right data set. All by itself, I don't think it's very revealing. I'm hopeful that as the experts look at these photographs, maybe they can tell us something about the state of the vehicle. Now, as this week closes, we need to recognize that we have begun to open a new chapter in this investigation process. This week, the chapter of this week is closing, and it's been a frustrating week. The emotion has run high, The disappointment cannot be overstated. Gone through these memorials. It's been difficult for our team, but it's been beneficial because of the beginning of a healing process. But here we are today, a week later, almost a week later, and we are focused on solving the problem. An investigation board has arrived in Houston, and we've spent a lot of time with them transitioning our role, or understanding our roles and responsibilities, and transitioning the leadership and handing over the reins of this investigation to that board. Our support to this board is absolutely critical, and we have pledged our unwavering support to them. If there's anything they need, we will provide it. And we are working night and day to help them, on a very difficult task over the coming weeks and months. So again, let me say that we have a tremendous amount of work to do. The state of the team, if I were to report on their well-being, I'm extremely proud of them. They have risen to the occasion. They have overcome their own personal difficulties and are engaged in trying to find what went wrong across the country. East Coast, West Coast, everywhere we look, the professionalism is outstanding in the face of these trials and challenges that we have experienced. Also, as we close this week, I believe the chapter closes on the way we're handling these press conferences. We have been, in my opinion, as open as we can with you. We have expressed some of our feelings. We have revealed to you data that we don't even understand. We've shown you information that we know now may have been wrong, and we are going to have to adjust it. So you have been looking over our shoulder, so to speak, watching us go through this process. Typically, you never see this process. And whenever we have an investigation or any type of technical problem, this is pretty much typical. It is met with information that comes to your knowledge. Typically, the information is somewhat ragged and unreliable, and over time it gets better, and we find ourselves sometimes contradicting ourselves and moving in different directions because of what the data is trying to tell us. It changes day by day, sometimes hour by hour. And so, as you describe it, we may change our tune, we may change our direction, we may reverse our course. I think all those are acceptable descriptions of the process, as long as we are true to ourselves in trying to be rigorous about what the information means and what we need to do about solving the puzzle. As for me, I don't believe you'll need me up here anytime soon to talk to you about the information and the data. I think that chapter is closing. As we have turned over the reins of leadership on this investigation to the investigation board, this investigation board will now take over the handling of the briefings to the media and to the public. And we'll let you know the briefing schedule. One final comment before we open it up for questions. The purpose, one major purpose for us being so open and honest with you in this public setting, not only to let you follow along with us and to let the public follow along and try to understand what we're going through, but also to let the members of our team from across the country tune in and receive the latest information at our disposal. So whether they're on the East Coast or the West Coast, they have a feeling for what is going on in a very tragic situation. And the best thing for them is to try and understand what the events are from day to day and what information is being gathered. Even if it's preliminary or premature to report, the best thing we can do for them is to report it. It's the healthiest thing for my team. And I hope you understand that also. I think it's been healthy for you to understand it. And as I've read some of your articles and reports, I think most of you have understood it and got the facts right. And I appreciate the way you have handled this part of the investigation so far. And so with that, I'll try to answer your questions to the best of my ability.
Okay, we're going to start in Houston. As you know, we're going to be running pretty short on time, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. Let's work across, starting right here, and try to keep it to one question, please.
Can you explain clearly what you think, why you think those wiring bundles might prove to later be important?
Well, if you were looking for one common event, and you saw a number of different parameters in many different locations, all being affected by what we think may be one common event, maybe the wire bundles is a connecting link. And so we need to examine that. I don't know whether it's one event or two events. I don't know if it's cause or effect. We have to work through those types of scenarios and the questions that will certainly be asked to understand what this information really means.
Okay, right here.
From what you've said in the briefing so far, it sounds like although the jets were trying to compensate for some drag on the left side, the shuttle was still in roughly the right orientation as it descended. So what I'm wondering is, as you think about this now, do you think it's more likely that A, the growing drag was enough to suddenly send the ship out of control and that made it break up, or B, the ship suddenly broke up because of some other issue, like hot plasma melting the wing or something else?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. What's interesting, as we have looked at some of the videos that you have provided to us, is that it certainly appears that something is happening earlier in the time frame, in the sequence over Arizona and New Mexico. We need to go examine the films and try to understand what that's trying to tell us. But we do not see anything manifested in the data or the flying qualities of the vehicle, which is very interesting. We don't see any real temperature excursions. We don't see any systems anomalies. We don't see any handling qualities dispersions other than what I've described to you with what seems to be an indication of increasing drag on the left wing. That's all the information we have. We're hopeful that maybe we'll get other clues, but we'll have to wait for those clues to come forward and try to piece the puzzle together.
Let's go Bill and then Marshall.
I almost said GPI there for a second, didn't I? CBS News, I'm sorry. Ron, on the picture you showed us, which I agree with you, it's difficult to make out. You did show, it does look a little bit asymmetrical. I'm assuming that's a negative photograph.
I think it needs to be understood, you know, the angle at which the photograph was taken. All that needs to be factored in.
If you had any idea about the geometry?
I don't yet, but you're exactly right. That's exactly the questions we have. When we examine the photo, you'll have to understand where the location was to take the photograph, what was the angle, and how did it reflect as far as the planar view of the vehicle itself.
And the only other thing that was clear to my eye anyway, I'm sure yours too, it did look like there was some kind of plume trailing the left wing. I'm assuming that we're expecting that to be some sort of thermal event. I mean, that doesn't look...
It does look, just if you looked at the picture with no technical understanding, it does look like there's something a little different about the left-hand side behind the wing than the right-hand side. And you can see that in this area right here. That does look a little different to us. And that's an area of investigation.
Okay, Marcia.
Marcia Bennett, Associated Press. Ron, I wanted to continue along that line. You said some people mentioned that to them it looked a little odd. How did they verbalize that? What did you hear? Did you hear anyone use the word jagged among the people who have looked at this from the interior?
Well,
and I'm just wondering if indeed there is something is jagged there or deformed, does it take us back to launch day when, does it give more emphasis to the foam issue?
I think looking at the film with our untrained eye, someone might almost interpret that there is something there. I can't tell. I look at it and I say, well, I don't know if that's an artifact of the photograph or is the photograph really trying to reveal something. So I've left it to the experts to analyze the photograph and come back and give me their expert opinion. And I forgot the second part of your question.
I mean, if indeed there is something wrong there.
It does not indicate whether an event occurred on launch day or on orbit or even during entry. You cannot tell from that photograph. If there is any damage, you do not know when it occurred. Okay, right here.
Lee Hochstetter of the Washington Post. Ron, to return back to an issue from midweek that you addressed, General Stelnick addressed also, about what the crew knew when it knew it. You said that the crew was made aware when the engineers knew of the event with the foam at liftoff. I'm curious as to whether you can tell us anything more specifically about how the crew was told, whether the crew had any questions about that event at liftoff, how the communication took place, whether by voice or email, any specificity that you can add to that issue.
At this time, I don't recall exactly the sequence of events. Typically, when we would alert the crew, we do it by voice and we would follow it up with an email or a message. And perhaps in the message give them a little bit more detail so that they can read it. Just like you and I would, we could have a phone conversation followed up by anything documented. It's a lot easier because then the crew at their leisure and their off time can read the information again and discuss it on orbit. So I'm almost positive that's what happened, but we're going to have to get those details to make sure for certainty how all that sequenced together. And we have it. We can get it to you. Because I wasn't there, I can't answer that firsthand, and it would be a secondary comment. So let me have the opportunity to get the people that were there firsthand to give you that answer. And Marianne and then Mike.
Marianne Dyson with National Geographic. Do you know when the wheel well was secured prior to launch, and can you rule out that there was anything left behind?
It's secured prior to rolling over from the orbiter processing facility to the vertical assembly building. Obviously, the wheels have to be up and the gear locked in place and the door closed before you made it to the external tank. In that time frame was your last inspection period also. And there are very rigid inspections and criteria that must be met before we pass that the landing gear is properly in its position within the wheel well, and that the door itself, the main landing gear door, is up and latched properly. So Mike right here.
Mike Cabbage with the Orlando Sentinel. Ron, as you mentioned at the top of the briefing, there's been a little confusion, mainly on our part, I guess, to some extent, on what the various theories have been and the role of the insulation and the foam impact in all of this. And I was wondering, now that we're a week into the investigation, can you characterize for us what role, if any, you think the foam might have had? Are you discounting it as any sort of a major player in this, or do you think that that it's still potentially something that is a major culprit here? How are you focusing on this as you move ahead?
We're focusing on the foam loss off the external tank and the impact to the wing as a potential contributor to the cause or the loss of the vehicle. I mentioned to you earlier in the week why I thought, to help you understand why I thought that it may not be the most likeliest contributor, because we've had it in the past and our experience has shown that it has never been a contributor. But that has not stopped us from keeping it in our job jar of things to go investigate. And in fact, if you saw the activity in the Michoud facility, you would be amazed at how much work is going on to try and solve just that very point. Tremendous number of engineers working around the clock to develop fault trees and testing plans. It is our intention to test the foam and impact to a tile to prove that it either was a contributor or it wasn't. So we're not going to let it lay aside. We're not going to ignore it. We're going to be proactive and prove that by data and evidence that it either was or was not a player, along with all the other fault tree branches and roots in other systems. So it's still in our job jar. Those people have been working all week, and I don't think we've reversed direction on our activity. You may have witnessed some of our emphasis up and down through the week, but the people in MAF wouldn't know that we have changed our emphasis. They have been working around the clock since Saturday.
Welcome to June from NHK. I know experts are analyzing the photos. Do you know if they're going to be looking at previous flight photos, comparing, using any?
Oh, absolutely right. The way we understand whether something is not right or off nominal is to compare it with another photograph, maybe in another mission. For instance, the photograph that you saw from the New Mexico Kirtland Air Force Base area, we would like to find another photograph that is similar to it on another mission so that we can compare the two, and that's the best way to see if there's something that's misaligned or something that's not right. So we're going to go back to our databases and our experience and try to get a comparison of something that we know was absolutely pristine and compare it with this flight and this mission and see if there's anything that pokes out or alerts us to a change in configuration or some type of off-nominal event.
Two more here. We'll get Mark right there and then right here on the front.
Rowe from the Houston Chronicle. I want to go back to the sensors. It seems like the story they're telling are sort of like the falling crumbs along the trail in the old fairy tale that we heard when we were young, but to your practice eye, where is that trail leading in relation to the geography of the wing?
I have been very careful through this entire week not to draw conclusions. It's a very tempting thing to do. You want to draw conclusions as quick as you can based on the information. And I know many of you have succumbed to that temptation also. But you can't do that. We have been in this business long enough to know that you go down that merry path of making a judgment or a rush to judgment, and you will be fooled. You need to go through the process. You need to gather the data. You need to correlate all the data, the time frames, the evidence, the photos, the way the system behaved. And you need to do it under the scrutiny of a microscope for you to get the right answer. And even though it's a temptation for us to try to make a judgment, our experience has shown that you should not, and we will not, until we get all the data together and are able to come tell you what we believe this information represents as far as the root cause.
Right there, go ahead.
David Chandler from New Scientist magazine. I have a question about the sort of overall methodology that you're using, and you've talked a lot about this fault tree analysis and how that works. Can you explain a little bit in that approach to the problem how you deal with interrelationships between different components or different phenomena or different things that may have happened, different parts of that fault tree that may affect each other in some way that amplifies the effect or produces some kind of a feedback loop or something like that, so that what you get is a result that's greater than or different than the two things looked at in isolation? How do you treat that as you're looking through a fault tree analysis? And more broadly, what's your thinking at this point about, what's your feeling at this point about a single cause versus some combination of causes that play off each other?
Well, this fault tree analysis technique that we use is a very effective technique at making sure you don't overlook any possible cause that may lead to resolution of the problem. And it dives down into the system to a very great extent. For instance, the external tank fault tree in pages is probably a half an inch thick. So the number of blocks that you have to go through is hundreds, if not 1,000 or more. And that's just the external tank. And we have asked the main engine, the solid rocket booster, the solid rocket motor, and the orbiter to produce fault trees also. And so you can see, you take the external tank, you multiply it by at least 4 or 5, and that's the magnitude or the size of the fault tree for the accident that we're trying to solve. And then you look at it from an integrated level, just not from a stovepipe, one system look. You have to look at it from, well, is it a combination? Or were there multiple effects or events? And you have to look at the overall aspect of the fault tree. That's about as simple as I can make it today. It's not that simple, and it takes a lot of people to put these things together. And the fault trees, in actuality, change constantly as you get smarter and smarter about the system, and you ask yourself questions. What if? What if? And you answer it with a then or another piece of information, and you add it to your fault tree. So it's an ever-changing type of process until you get to a document that you believe represents the total area that you need to consider, and then you can't think of the right word right now, but you painstakingly close out every route, every branch to get to the right solution.
Okay, let's go to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida for questions, please.
Hi, this is Chris Kreidler from Florida today. Ron, I know you're kicking around an awful lot of theories right now, but I wondered if you might talk about static electricity generated in reentry and maybe other electrical events that might affect the carbon-carbon on the wings. Can an electrical event damage that, and is that a theory you might be looking at?
I really have no idea whether we had any static electricity, whether or not we had any electrical discharge. I don't know, and we are asking experts in the field of atmospheric science if those types of events are even possible, especially at the altitudes that we were flying, greater than 200,000 feet. And so we're going to need to ask that question to the experts and let them feed us some information, because at this point we're at a loss as far as whether a phenomenon exists that represents some type of discharge at that altitude, especially in the relatively clear skies that we were flying on last Saturday.
Ron, this is Seth Borenstein with Night Reader Newspapers. I'm wondering, can you tell me when and where will the foam impact tests be conducted, and will there be other physical tests of the foam or other things that you're going to be doing in the next 2 weeks, just to help give a time frame of what kind of tests you're looking at?
Well, the activity is being led by the engineers at the Marshall Space Flight Center. They're located at the scene in where we manufacture the tanks, which is in Michoud, Louisiana. I don't have the specifics because I don't think they have the specifics yet. They've spent all week just generating the fault tree. They are starting to formulate the plans for testing, and I suspect that the testing will occur in several different places, and so that we can do parallel testing, do multiple testing at the same time, and thereby cut down the amount of time it takes to complete all the testing.
Ron, this is Flynn McRoberts from the Chicago Tribune. Do you have a sense of whether the shuttle went out of control due to an aerodynamic or other problem and then broke up, or was the ship flying well when it broke up?
At the point where we lost data and lost voice communication with the crew, it was not apparent to us that we were out of control. The data indicated that the flight control system was still trying to correct whatever drag dispersion we had. And it was able, at this point, from a flight control standpoint, it was still able to maintain control. But as I said yesterday, it was losing the battle over time because the rates of the dispersion, if you want to think about it that way, the dispersion seemed to be overcoming the muscle that was available at the time to counter it. And even though we were still flying straight and in the general attitude that we desired, we can see that the aerial surfaces were continuing to increase in their magnitude to counter the drag. The jets were firing again to counter the drag. And when we lost data, they were still holding control of the vehicle. So that's right now. We still appear to be in an acceptable attitude for flying the vehicle at the point where we lost voice and data.
Ron, this is Stefan Akuladam for the New York Times. Is the sensor map you just went through with us earlier showing all the sensors, including, I mean, those, if there are any, in the wing's leading edge?
I'm not sure that in this cartoon we included every sensor that was available. This is a cartoon that we put together to help us understand the sequence of events, given the data that we understand loss of information or loss of the sensor working versus temperature rising over time. I'll have to check on that, Stefano. I'm not positive of that, and it's doubtful that I would believe it's doubtful that we captured all the sensors. I think this is our cartoon of only the sensors that we've been talking about over the last week.
Ron, this is Jay Barbary with NBC. When will you start moving the debris here, and when and where will the briefings be held by the board?
Some of the debris is already headed to KSC. I'm aware that we had a report that we retrieved a turbo pump, one of the main engine turbo pumps, and I think the report identified that they were just going to wrap that up and transport it to KSC. Most of the debris is going to Barksdale Air Force Base, where it is being cataloged, examined, photographed, bagged, tagged, and then packaged to be removed and relocated to the Kennedy Space Center. And that will be happening as a process. In other words, we don't need all the debris to be collected and staged at Barksdale Air Force Base before we move it. It will be received, go through this process I just explained, and then relocated. Once at KSC, then we'll go through the laborious task of identifying the piece and trying to reconstruct the vehicle.
Briefings, please. You know when the briefings will start, Ron?
I'm going to let Kyle give you the schedule. I'm not aware of the briefing schedule at this point.
Mike Branham, Associated Press. Being that NASA will sometimes take spare parts from orbiters and put them in another as not to delay missions, and that Columbia's loss eliminates a quarter of the fleet, is there a possibility that one of the remaining 3 orbiters will have to be gutted to keep the other 2 flying?
There's no possibility of that. We have no plans to make one of the 3 remaining vehicles a hangar queen in any sense of the imagination. We have sufficient spares to keep the 3 remaining vehicles flying for as long as the government, this nation, desires these vehicles to fly. And we are continuing to invest in making sure we have sufficient spares and stores available to keep these vehicles in good flying shape. And where we see there are deficiencies, then we will expend resources to make sure we change those weaknesses to strengths.
That's all in Florida now to NASA headquarters, a snowy white NASA headquarters in Washington, please.
Ron, this is Ricardo Alonso Zaldivar with the LA Times. My question, at a prior briefing, Ron, you gave us a timeline of your efforts to work the film issue. And my question concerns that timeline that you gave us. And basically you said that the mission management team had two meetings at which this came up, and I believe one was January 24th and the other one was January 27th. And I wanted to ask you, what, in between those meetings, what happened? Did you send the engineers back to do some additional work? Were there some unresolved questions at the first meeting, and if so, what were they and how were they resolved?
Let me answer that question by really describing the process of how the mission management team works during a flight in the control center environment. The mission management team meets periodically. It does not meet every day. It meets as a function of important milestones or events during the flight. So it's not something that is every day as far as gathering the entire mission management team together to discuss what may or may not be happening in a flight. It will also meet as required to discuss technical issues. Now, what happens in between when they're not meeting? The people involved in the management team are responsible to be knowledgeable about what is happening in the flight, whether there's a technical issue or whether or not there are important critical events that are going to occur and whether their support is required. So even though I talked to you about a timeline of events where we have teams that were off analyzing information concerning the debris and then reporting to the mission management team on 2 occasions, it is significantly more than that when you talk about how it is in practice, how the information is in practice transmitted to the management team. They are in the control center many times during the flight without holding a mission management team meeting. And when they're there, they are talking to the engineering teams, they're talking to the flight control teams, and they are transferring information. What is critical? What analysis are we performing? What are the conclusions? What are the assumptions? These are the typical types of things that are being discussed outside of a formal mission management team meeting. Prior to a flight, to put this in perspective, when we get ready to hold a flight readiness review, it's a very methodical process over a period of a month and weeks to get ready to support a flight readiness review. In the time frame of a flight, because the flight is only 10 or 11 days long, you don't have the same opportunity to utilize this time-consuming, very methodical process. So we use this mission management team approach where information is exchanged formally and informally. Both the upper management, flight control, astronauts, safety, quality, engineering. And so as you see a timeline and you say, well, they only held 5 meetings, they weren't very serious, that is extremely misrepresenting what happens in a flight. Numerous conversations occur outside of the mission management team so that we are all aware of the technical issues. We are all aware of the engineering challenges. We're all aware of the analysis. We're all aware of the assumptions. We talk one to another, to our technical experts outside the meeting to get a feeling on whether or not the problem represents a concern or if it's in family within our database. And those types of discussions help us determine whether we need to call in a bigger team with more formal briefings. And so you need to understand that it is largely the flight environment where we do this types of activities where it's a constant type of information exchange. Don't get locked into how many meetings we held. Don't get locked into how long we talked about it at a particular meeting. That's irrelevant. What's important is, did we discuss the topic? Were we knowledgeable about the topic? Did we talk to the right technical experts? Did we complete the appropriate analysis? Did we agree on the results? And in this case, that process was followed. And as I reported earlier, all those things I just mentioned, you can put a check in the square, those things happened. And it doesn't matter to me how much time we spent in a particular meeting, because success is not how long the meeting is. Success is how relevant the data is, how good the analysis is, and how adequate the conclusions. And if you test them properly, and you have the right checks and balances that are this healthy tension between operations and engineering and safety and analysis, if you have the right checks and balances, you've got the right process in place. And we had the right process in place. We had the right healthy tension. We called on the proper experts. We are knowledgeable about whether it was in family and whether it was within our experience base. All those things happened. And I'm very satisfied that the process was followed within the context of the flight mission management team.
Ron, it's Patty Reiner with the Houston Chronicle. Could you tell us more detail about the latest debris that was found near Fort Worth? When was that found and where? And can you explain a little more why you can't tell whether it's the left wing or the right wing?
Well, that's fairly easy for me to answer because I receive a phone call. And it tells me we found a piece of debris. Doesn't tell me where necessarily. Tells me what it is. Doesn't tell me whether it's left wing or right wing. It tells me we're analyzing whether it is left or right. Tells me approximately when I should have some more information. And so I get the essential points, the essential information, and I let the team continue to evolve so that they work to get the correct data from the particular piece of debris. If I demand too much information too early, I'm just going to get a first report that is not going to be very reliable. I let the team work it. They give me the essential information as soon as they know that it's factual, and then I rely upon them to continue to work. And when they have something that they know is factual, they'll call me back and let me know. What I know today about that particular wing leading edge is that we have it. It was found, I don't even know where it was found, but I think it was staged at the Carswell Air Force Base location, so that's, I'm assuming, Dallas-Fort Worth area. I gave you the parameters that were related to me, and what I have related to you is all I know. And when we get more information, we'll pass that on.
Charles Sykes, Science Magazine. Over the years, NASA has beefed up the thermal protection of the shuttle's trailing edges, including the Elevon and Elevon Cove. What were the issues with plasma flow that caused you to upgrade the thermal protection there?
I'm not really sure. I'd have to go back and research what upgrades you're talking about and go back in history, and because I don't recall, and try to refresh my mind. Were there some particular environments that we didn't think we had sufficient margin and that we wanted to put in a greater level of margin by changing a configuration? I can't answer the question other than to say I don't know at this time, but we can certainly research that and get you the history behind it.
One remaining at times. There's one remaining lightweight tank, the companion to one that was on Columbia. Are you going to use that as an active test article and put it through some trials down in Louisiana? What are you going to do with that?
We have two lightweight tanks. We had two lightweight tanks. One was ET-93, and that was the tank that we flew on STS-107. We have its sister tank, ET number 94. It's a lightweight tank also. It was manufactured and constructed in the same time frame as ET-93, but just 2 months apart. So they're twins of a sort. And ET-94 is sitting in the facility at Michoud, Louisiana, and when I was there today, it is impounded. I reviewed it, I looked at it, it is there for us to use if we need it, but it certainly is a sister ship manufactured at the same time as ET-93, so that if there were any questions about ET-93 and its pedigree, perhaps we could utilize ET-94 to answer those questions. So that's something that we're considering depending on the questions that come up.
Okay, down to Huntsville, Alabama, the Marshall Space Flight Center for one question, please.
Hey Ron, Garrett Sheehan with WAFF 48 News. You mentioned your trip to Michoud today and the pressure the workers were feeling there. Since Marshall manages the liftoff programs, do you get that same sense here at Marshall? And are you planning a visit here in the near future?
I would assume that there is a certain amount of pressure and stress at every location. It's true here in Houston. I think it was certainly increased in Louisiana just because of the rhetoric during the week, the reports in the media, and even some of the things that I have commented about. It is my intention to go to each one of the sites in the near future and talk to the workforce, keep them abreast of what's happening, answer their questions to the best of my ability, and let them understand what we are doing and assure them that we will keep them informed of what's happening. I'm going to continue to ask them to process vehicles. I'm going to continue to ask them to do work in a lot of other areas. Not everybody in the program will be involved in the investigation. So there's still many different areas that the program is involved in that will require their attention. But for them to be informed is very important to me.
Okay, California and the Ames Research Center, please, for 2 questions.
Dennis Tishner, KMTV, San Jose, California. Ron, just curious, there's been a lot of things written here in the local media and a lot of talk about something we mentioned yesterday, and that is this photograph taken by an amateur astronomer given to Ms. Jernigan in Ames and then sent to Houston that shows some sort of anomaly or bolt of something somewhere here over California, and the writings and the things that have been mentioned have been things like sprites, blue jets, or elves that happen at that level of atmosphere. Just wondering if you've had a chance to take a look at that photo, or if you're still looking at those things to compile information about that type of investigation.
I have seen the photo. We have sent the photo off to be examined to verify its validity. We have not completed that activity yet. We have invited some atmospheric scientists to come to the Johnson Space Center to help us understand, is there any phenomena that they know of that might exist in the upper atmosphere? So we're working a couple activities in parallel at the same time and trying to understand if there's any merit to this particular photograph. Still in work.
Matt Standard with the San Francisco Chronicle. You have mentioned several times that you are reviewing the possibility of atmospheric electromagnetic phenomena. Is there anything in the shuttle telemetry compared with past missions that would suggest that it encountered any type of electromagnetic phenomenon during reentry? Also, can you specify the 4 closed debris findings in California, please?
There's nothing in the data stream and the information that I have received to date that would cause any concern on our part, other than what I've talked to you about. As far as the debris in California, I don't have any knowledge of it. I haven't received those particular reports other than the particular metrics that I reported to you.
Okay, 2 final questions in Lufkin, Texas, the command center there. Go ahead.
Jeff Yip, the New York Times. Could you please tell us where exactly the wing was found and by who?
I think I addressed that earlier. I don't know who exactly found it. I don't know if it was a member of our public that is helping us search for debris and then notified the authorities. I don't know that information, and I don't know the exact location of where it was found, other than the general area that it was reported to be at Carswell Air Force Base.
Charlie Hodges from KRLD Radio in Dallas. What is the true significance of this wing find in the Dallas-Fort Worth area? And is there any significance of the fact that this is a major structure that is so far back towards the west from the rest of the major debris is? And another thing, too, on security, with the security alert being elevated, does that mean that we have any kind of security problems within the debris area?
I've been up here a long time. You're taxing my ability to remember everything that you asked me, so I'll take a stab at it. In fact, since I listened to you, I've forgotten the entire question. I mean, that's just a function of my poor abilities to remember. So you take a stab at it again, but condense it down into what you would like me to answer, because you keep stringing these questions. My limited ability is going to forget.
I think all of us have a limited ability right now. I apologize for that. The significance of the find and the fact that it's so far west, is that from where the rest of the debris is, does that tell you anything, or could that tell you anything as to the cause of the crash?
Okay, all right, I got that part. It doesn't yet. I don't know if it's left wing or right wing. If it's right wing, maybe that's not as significant. If it's left wing, I think that would be more significant. Certainly we're more interested in the left wing. If it's leading edge material, which it was reported to be, at what location in the wing leading edge is it? Is it in the area that we thought we had the most emphasis, and that would be in the wing leading edge area 7 through 10. If it's inbound or outbound or inward or outward of that location, I don't know. So the fact that it was in the Carswell area, I don't know if that's significant or not either. That's just this first report, and the process of investigation, examining where debris fell and where it was gathered is going to be very important as far as piecing the puzzle together about what happened at altitude.
Okay, that's all the questions we have time for.
Turn now to the very latest on the investigation into the Space Shuttle disaster. Investigators today say that the discovery of a large piece of the Shuttle Columbia could help investigators determine the cause of that accident. A section of a wing was discovered near Fort Worth, Texas. A number of heat-deflecting tiles were still attached. NASA also confirms that it received photographs taken by a military camera shortly before the shuttle disintegrated. But NASA did not confirm that the pictures reveal structural damage to the shuttle's left wing. That detail was reported by Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine. Meanwhile, an amnesty for the return of shuttle debris expired tonight, when the 75 shuttle items were turned in one county in Texas alone yesterday. The families of the shuttle astronauts lost more than a loved one. In some cases, they also lost their primary source of income. Scholarship funds have been established for the 12 children of the astronauts, but many of the families still face an uncertain financial future. Tim O'Brien has the story from Washington.
Even if Saturday's tragedy could be traced to gross negligence on the part of NASA, the astronauts' families would not be entitled to recover from the government much more than the equivalent of workman's compensation. NASA won't say how much, but it's about 55% of what the astronauts' pensions would have been based on salary and years of service. NASA is protected by an ancient but still vibrant doctrine called sovereign immunity.
The federal government is basically substituted for the British monarch, and under common law, the British monarch could not be sued in his own courts.
To save money, NASA had farmed out more than 90% of the shuttle work to the private sector, largely to Lockheed Martin and Boeing. Their contracts may include waivers of liability, but even if they don't, under a 1988 Supreme Court decision, those companies would also be immune from liability if they could show they followed reasonable directions from the government and warned officials about any potential problems they had identified. The families of the Challenger space shuttle astronauts could not sue the government, but together did recover almost $10 million from Morton Thiokol, the maker of the booster rockets that allegedly contained defective O-rings.
In the past, it's always been the government contractors who place profits ahead of safety, and as a result cost these Americans their lives and our country the lives of their heroes that had to pay.
Attorney Ronald Crist not only represented 3 of the families in the Challenger disaster, but also the wife of astronaut Gus Grissom, who, along with his crew, was killed when the Apollo 1 spacecraft burst in flames during a launch pad test in 1967.
You know, Gus did give his life for this space program.
Betty Grissom did receive a settlement in 1971 from North American Rockwell, which has since run out. She is living today on her late husband's pension and Social Security, about $2,000 a month. It would, however, not be unprecedented for the government, as a gesture of appreciation and goodwill, to offer additional compensation to the families of lost American heroes. And Jan, that would seem to be at least a viable possibility here.
That's right, Tim. Thanks. There are more than 200 pages of items related to the Space Shuttle Columbia listed for sale on eBay. None of those items are debris from the shuttle's breakup. Many of them are part of earlier Columbia flights. eBay told CNN that trading in shuttle memorabilia was enthusiastic before Columbia's tragedy, and officials decided to retain the listings as long as they were appropriate. eBay also noted that many of the same items are still being offered for sale on NASA's website.
I'm really disappointed that I didn't get a chance to go down and watch that launch, because that's what he wrote and invited me to do. And I just was too busy to go, but I wish I'd have made the time. From what I have heard, he was one fantastic human being. And I've now talked to his wife, and she's a special lady too. And so he asked if we would like to send something into space with the shuttle, on the shuttle. And it couldn't be glass, and it couldn't be wood, and it couldn't be metal. It had to be something very light. And so I selected a Focus on the Family hat, a cap, and I signed the bill, and he took it into space. And who knows where that cap is today. But my heart just goes out to those brave people who have paid the price.
When you heard of it? Were you watching television?
I was on the treadmill, where I spend a lot of time these days. I turned on the television in the morning, and there it was. And I had a big lump in my throat, and I do today. You know, those are the best and brightest. Those are the wonderful people.
You are not a reverend, we have to keep pointing out. Your doctorate is in what?
I have a PhD in child development, yeah.
Why do bad things happen to good people? Why did these 7 people, the unanswerable, why did they die?
Larry, I wrote a book on that called When God Doesn't Make Sense, and it took me 240 pages to say there are some things, some questions we simply can't answer.
So why do you continue your faith when you don't get the answer?
Because the Scripture tells us to lean not on our own understanding.
That's a crutch. Don't let it bother you. Someone else will worry about it.
Well, I have confidence in the Lord. I have confidence in God and in my Lord, Jesus Christ. And I believe that he has the answers even when I don't. And he told us to trust him even when we can't track him. If you have to answer every question in order to follow him, you're going to be one frustrated person, because he doesn't give us that. You know, Larry, in the book of Job, you know the book of Job in the Bible, Job was a man who went through unimaginable difficulty, and he asked wonderful questions of God, and God never answered one of those questions. He will not be accountable to man.
Don't you want answers as a thinking, human, rational being?
Yeah, my philosophy, and if you will, my theology is I follow the line of reasoning as far as I can. Eventually, I'm going to run into a brick wall, and when I do, I say I accept.
Your faith.
Yes.
We'll be back with Dr. James Dobson. We're going to take a lot of calls for Dr. Dobson tonight. He is the president, founder of Focus on the Family. Don't go away.
Spurensuche nach Shuttle-Absturz. Der Osten von Texas wird weiter nach Trümmern der vor einer Woche abgestürzten Raumfähre Columbia durchkämmt. Bislang wurden rund 12.000 Trümmerteile gefunden. Finder gaben Hunderte von Teilen der Columbia jetzt ab, nachdem ihnen Straffreiheit zugesichert wurde. Darunter offenbar ein wichtiges Teil der linken Tragfläche. Nach einem neuen Foto eines Teleskops hatte ein Schaden am linken Flügel offenbar die Katastrophe ausgelöst.
Das Bild wurde nur wenige Minuten vor dem Absturz des US-Shuttles aufgenommen. Die Ermittler bei der NASA erhoffen sich von ihm Hinweise auf die Ursache des Unglücks. Die Raumfähre war am vergangenen Samstag beim Landeanflug in 60 Kilometern Höhe auseinandergebrochen.
Welcome back. A 2-foot wing section from the Shuttle Columbia remains a major clue to what caused the disaster. NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe says investigators should know, quote, in relatively short order which wing it came from. That comment followed a memorial service at an Air Force base in Louisiana where the shuttle fragments are being stored. For years, there's been debate over how to improve chances of surviving such a catastrophe. It's been suggested NASA come up with an escape system for its astronauts. Kathleen Koch reports.
America's first space shuttle, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
On the first shuttle launch back in 1981, there were ejection seats similar to those on fighter planes, one for each of the 2 crew members.
There's been an acceptance that you really can't bail out of these things very readily.
Air and Space Museum historian Roger Launius says the seats were taken out after just 4 flights because of their weight and limited usefulness.
They're not much good if you're above about 50,000 feet, and clearly if you're going in hypersonic speeds, they're not much good for you either. The individuals would be going too fast to survive the ejection.
After the 1986 Challenger explosion, NASA devised a landing escape system, but it again only works at low altitudes.
It's a curved telescoping pole which they use to slide down on a lanyard with a parachute on the astronaut's back, but this is only good for straight and level, under 250 knots, like as if you're not going to make the runway and you bail out instead.
Some insist the only possible way to protect astronauts during higher altitude breakups is a self-contained escape module or pod.
When you had an instance where the vehicle did a rapid maneuver like this one did when the wing came off, it would activate the escape modules and eject them out into the atmosphere.
But a former member of a NASA advisory panel that recommended such a module admits it wouldn't have helped Columbia's astronauts.
The conditions under which the shuttle came apart were well above any possibility of, at least in my opinion, of having a capsule that would survive.
NASA maintains retrofitting the current shuttle with an escape system would make it too heavy and be costly and complex.
I personally think that with the current space shuttle orbiter that we have, it is very difficult to integrate.
So some believe astronauts should be given more tools to make in-orbit repairs. NASA, though, points out there are no handholds on the bottom of the shuttle, so astronauts can't work there. Plus, such gear would eat up space and weight that could be used for experiments.
We don't want to overburden our flights with every article of protection when the probability of occurrence is extremely low.
The hope is that when NASA designs a new orbiter to replace the aging shuttle, it will incorporate a more sophisticated and comprehensive escape system. But the next generation of shuttle likely won't be ready to fly until 2020 at the earliest. Kathleen Koch, CNN, Washington.
Investigators say they have identified a piece of the Space Shuttle Columbia's critical left wing. That piece was found last week in the state of Texas. Space agency officials say Columbia's problems may have started on that wing.
I think they have identified that they have at least one piece of the left wing. And clearly you have to understand that when you go out into the field and look at this material, our own experts are having a difficult time determining what some of these objects are. And of course, we're not just finding them, but we're cataloging them and tagging them to get them back to the reconstruction site just as quickly as we can.
NASA is asking the Columbia Accident Investigation Board to give a report in 60 days.
And time is really a major factor here because there are 3 space travelers still flying high above the Earth. Travelers who rely on the shuttle. Kenneth Bowersox, Donald Petit, and Nikolai Budarin were expecting a delivery from Atlantis and a ride home next month. Instead, they'll be staying on at the International Space Station a while longer. All shuttles have been grounded until NASA can find out what went wrong with Columbia.
The crew says they support that decision for safety's sake, but they also welcome the extra time in space.
For me, as an individual, the reason I come here to space is because I believe that exploring is important, that we're laying a foundation for our children and their children to leave the planet someday. Part of that legacy that we're going to leave them is a continuous presence here that started, a human presence that started back in the Mir program. And we would like to see that. But that's as much emotional as logical. If we were to have to demand the station, it would not be a huge setback to our program. The station will keep flying and we'll be able to send people back here if we need to. But on an emotional level, I really want to see people stay.
The crew says they've readily accepted the risks involved in space travel.
Bei der Aufklärung der Absturzursache der Columbia ist die NASA möglicherweise einen entscheidenden Schritt vorangekommen. Experten identifizierten nun ein Trümmerteil als ein Stück von der linken Tragfläche der Raumfähre. Die Beschädigung des Hitzeschildes an diesem Flügel gilt als mögliche Ursache der Katastrophe. Weitere Aufschlüsse erhoffen sich die Experten von der Auswertung eines gefundenen Bordcomputers.
Wichtiges Fundstück. Die NASA hat einen Teil der linken Tragfläche der Columbia entdeckt. An dem Flügel war kurz vor der Explosion des Shuttles ein starker Temperaturanstieg gemessen worden. Die bisher 12.000 geborgenen Trümmerteile sollen in dieser Woche nach Cape Canaveral gebracht werden. Dort will die NASA sie so weit wie möglich zusammensetzen.
Ursache. Die NASA hat einen Teil des linken Flügels des Space Shuttles Columbia entdeckt. Ein wichtiger Fund, da ein Schaden an der linken Tragfläche vermutlich zum Absturz führte. Möglicherweise wurde die Columbia dort von Weltraummüll getroffen. Die NASA hat inzwischen tausende Trümmerteile in einem Flugzeughangar in Louisiana gelagert. Von dort sollen sie nach Cape Canaveral gebracht werden. In Israel ist heute die Leiche des Astronauten Ilan Ramon im engsten Familienkreis beigesetzt worden.
Turning now to the shuttle investigation, NASA's chief today said there were no signs of any problems aboard Columbia until just seconds before they lost contact. NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe also told a congressional hearing that people on the Independent Investigative Board are the best in the world at what they do. Space correspondent Miles O'Brien is here now with the very latest on that investigation for us. Miles?
Lou, they may be the best in the world, and that is probably indisputable. The question from Congress today is, are they in fact truly independent enough to conduct an investigation which will be completely beyond reproach? Let's talk about the debris first before we get to that issue. Now about 15,000 pieces of Columbia debris have been bag tagged, accounted for, and are in the process now of being transported to the Kennedy Space Center to a hangar right beside the runway where Columbia should have landed on February 1st. 16 minutes after it disintegrated over Texas. The pieces will be laid out on that grid you see there, sort of assembled in roughly the order they were in the intact orbiter. The investigative team hopes that in the course of all that, they'll see some sort of smoking gun. Meanwhile, the team itself, headed by retired Admiral Hal Gaiman, arrived at the Kennedy Space Center, part of a whirlwind tour which amounts to Shuttle 101. Team learning all about how shuttles are put together, processed, as part of their process of conducting this investigation. As they were arriving, Sean O'Keefe was in Washington, and lawmakers were questioning the credibility of that board, which was picked by NASA only hours after the incident. Part of the Challenger playbook, I should point out. NASA had learned some lessons from the Presidential Commission, which was a part of that. And O'Keefe was defending the independence of that particular board.
We have our assurance that this distinguished board will be able to act with genuine independence. When the board assembled, it was modified its charter to eliminate any reference to NASA directing the administration of the investigation. So the framework that was contained in the contingency plan was modified and will continue to be to assure the independence of this board. NASA accepted the changes to the charter without objection, as I will continue to do in the future as well for any changes they propose.
But there are many people in Congress who insist a presidential commission is the way to go, Lou, a la the Rogers Commission, which did the investigation into Challenger. It remains to be seen how this all comes to pass, but Sean O'Keefe did say whatever it takes to make the final report absolutely a credible document. Lou?
Miles, thank you very much. Miles, Boeing is now involved in the investigation of the Columbia disaster. Phil Condon is Boeing's CEO and chairman. He joins me now from Boeing headquarters in Chicago. Phil, good to have you here.
Thanks, Lou.
Phil, I know that you are certainly as anxious as anyone involved in the space program to get to the answers here. Do you have any indication tonight of a promising area of inquiry?
No, you know, this looks so much like one of those things that we do occasionally, which is an aircraft accident investigation. The original leads are frequently not the final ones. You take it piece by piece, you do the work in detail, and you find the answer.
Well, Boeing, along with Lockheed Martin, drive the joint venture United Space Alliance, which is responsible for the operation of the shuttle. How many people now are involved from the corporate side in this investigation?
I can't give you an exact number. I met with our team down in Houston last Tuesday. That number was several hundred. We're bringing the best of Boeing, responding to the investigation. So whatever tools we can bring, we're bringing.
Do you, at this juncture, personally have an opinion on the board that has been put together by NASA, obviously challenged on the issue of its independence today in Washington on Capitol Hill? Your thoughts?
I think that everything's being done to make this the proper kind of investigation and, in fact, independent and capable of reaching that. Now, part of that, I think, also has to be that NASA wants to know the answer. They need to know the answer. We want to know the answer. So there's nobody here looking for other motives. We all want to know the answer, and so the independence of that board is crucial.
The recommendation that this be a presidential commission, much on similar basis as the Rogers Commission following the Challenger disaster. Do you think that would be a good idea?
I don't know that it changes the real fundamentals. If you've got a great leader, and I think this commission does, then I think you get the result that you're after because all of the parties want the answer. So yes, it could be a presidential commission, but I don't think it has to be.
Let me ask you a question that likely has no answer. Do you have any sense at all of how long the shuttle fleet will be grounded and the likelihood that we'll have a conclusion, a satisfactory conclusion on the investigation?
I have very high confidence that we will find the answer. The problem is predicting how long that's going to take is extremely difficult. All I can do is tell you that everybody working on it has the same drive. Find the answer, fix the problem, get the fleet back to operating.
Obviously, the International Space Station is dependent upon the shuttle. Is your company working either alone or with other companies to come up with an interim approach while we go through this period of a grounded shuttle?
Well, we're clearly looking at a set of options. You know, in the short term, resupply, as was done off of the Russian capability. Are there other things that can be done in the interim? But we're not at a point yet where that's a critical animal, and we're really looking at what the options are.
And there are those now saying that the tragic loss of Columbia means that the shuttle program has demonstrated that it is just not the correct strategy. The shuttle program, as you well know, with the criticism that has been mounting, its very existence is threatened. What are your thoughts there?
My guess is that what we will find is there is a correctable issue with the shuttle fleet and that we can proceed. I think the debate then needs to be, where do we go from here? What portions of space are unmanned and which ones are manned, and how do we best use our resources? I think human beings, I think man is meant to explore. I think there's a lot we don't know, and I think space offers enormous opportunities. So I think we will find ways of taking advantage and working those opportunities.
What comes next then in your best judgment after the shuttle?
I think there are several vehicles that are possible. One of them is something we've been working on, which is an unmanned vehicle that can operate autonomously and do a lot of things in space. Repair, refuel satellites, as an example. So that you are saving human space to do those things that the human being clearly does best. I think we will continue to find ways of exploring space with humans as well.
Many people may not realize, despite the tremendous involvement on the part of Boeing in space, that it represents just about 4% of your business. Is there a thought on your part of simply exiting the space business altogether?
No, I really think that there are lots of pieces that say to us, you got to be there. From the military side, we are absolutely convinced that space-based communications are a critical element of our strategy, and we've got to be there. That surveillance from space is a critical part of the strategy, and we have to be there. When you have those kind of capabilities, you're in the game, and you might as well be the best there is.
Phil Condon, thank you very much for being with us. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, Lou.
Phil Condon, the CEO of Boeing.
On February 1st, 2003, communication with Space Shuttle Columbia and her crew was lost.
Columbia, Houston, UHF com check.
They were 16 minutes from home.
Columbia, Houston, UHF com check. Columbia, Houston, UHF com check.
Columbia was hardly a thing of beauty, except to those of us who loved and cared for her. She was often badmouthed for being a little heavy in the rear end, but many of us can relate to that. Many said she was old and past her prime. Still, she had only lived barely a quarter of her design life. Columbia had a great many missions ahead of her. She, along with the crew, had her life snuffed out in her prime. Just as her crew has, Columbia has left us quite a legacy. Hail Columbia.
Their mission was almost complete, and we lost them so close to home. The men and women of the Columbia had journeyed more than 6 million miles and were minutes away from arrival and reunion. The loss was sudden and terrible, and for their families, the grief is heavy. This cause of exploration and discovery is not an option we choose. It is a desire written in the human heart. We are that part of creation which seeks to understand all creation. We find the best among us, send them forth into unmapped darkness, and pray they will return. They go in peace for all mankind, and all mankind is in their debt. Our journey into space will go on. In the skies today, we saw destruction and tragedy. Yet farther than we can see, there's comfort and hope.
Rick was a terrific human being and a great leader. He was my pilot on his first flight. I grew to really appreciate all of his talents, his gifts. His favorite saying, and I can hear him saying it right now, was, "You know, I feel more now like I did than when I first got here."
Willie McCool. Laurel described Willie as an 8-year-old trapped in a 10-year-old's body. Now, partly this referred to the fact that Willie had the genes from somewhere that made him look like a 10-year-old, his young appearance, but mainly it was a comment on Willie's almost boyish attitude.
Captain Dave Brown, United States Navy. Not only a medical doctor, but a naval aviator and an astronaut on top of that. He lived to explore, to do research, to find new cures, and he was fulfilled working in the laboratory aboard Columbia.
Kalpna, or Casey to her friends, she had a terrific sense of humor and loved flying small airplanes with her husband and loved flying in space. Flying was her passion. She would often remind her crew as their training flow would be delayed and become extended. She would say, "Man, you are training to fly in space. What more could you want?"
Laurel Clark. Laura was meticulous and detail-oriented, but she balanced this intensity with an absolute unwillingness to start any meeting without giving you a hug or asking about your family or telling you with pride about hers.
Mike, he was a perfect choice for the payload commander. Organized, thorough, someone you could absolutely count on, a gifted leader. We all loved to see him laugh. And when he laughed, we laughed with him even harder.
Ilan Ramon turned to me with a question. How does one mark the Sabbath in space? With every 90 minutes, another sunset. Every 10.5 hours is a Sabbath. Every 20 days, Rosh Hashanah. Jerusalem, we have a problem. But Ilan taught us a powerful message. No matter how fast we're going, no matter how important our work, we need to pause and think about why we're here on Earth.